All right, what's up? Hey, my name is Michael, and I am one of the co founders at Tandem Cyber Solutions, your go to penetration testing partner. I'm in charge of our penetration tests, and I'm also over the sales rep program we got kicked off this year. Now, in this video, we're going to be talking a little bit about the difference between the different types of assessments that we do at Tandem. And there really just comes down to three different types. You have a vulnerability scan, a penetration test, then on the upper end, you have red teaming engagements. So let's break each one of these down so that everyone understands exactly what they are. Now, a vulnerability scan is an automated test where it's just checking to see if a particular endpoint or device is vulnerable to a known issue. To make this easier to understand, if you ever look at the patch notes for particular software that you're getting an update for, which you may not have, they're pretty they're pretty boring. But in there, it may talk about, hey, there's a specific vulnerability and this patch is here to fix that vulnerability. Well, that's what we're looking for with the vulnerability scans. Is there something that's known that the version that you're currently running is vulnerable to? And there's a couple different ways it does that. So one of them, it just checks to identify what version of the software is running on that device. So it could just, for instance, if SSH is running, which is a communication port, it can talk to that particular software and say, hey, what version are you? And then it has a library to tell it what vulnerabilities there are for that particular version, and that comes out in the report that's delivered. Now, the other way is where there's a more benign payload for the attack itself. So there are, for many vulnerabilities, there are what we call public proof of concepts, which are little bits of code that can attack that vulnerability and to whatever effect it was designed to do. And the code in the vulnerability scanners are benign in the fact that it's not necessarily triggering the full attack, so like a denial of service condition, but it's doing something in order to trigger an effect that lets it know it is indeed vulnerable, so that we can say, yes, this system is particularly vulnerable to whatever the issue is. So those are your two different types of identifying whether something is vulnerable. And what happens with this, so it has a huge library of vulnerabilities, and it checks one of those two ways. It'll check to see if each one of the devices that you're scanning has any of those issues in its library. And then it'll let you know in the report where it says this particular device has all these issues associated with it. Now, that's the cheapest, the fastest thing that any offensive security program may have. It's also part of many patch management programs out there. And a lot of times, depending on how mature the organization is, they may do that on a very frequent cadence, like maybe weekly, all the way to monthly, quarterly, annually. It just depends on the maturity of the program. So the more frequent, the more mature the program is. And the benefit of doing it frequently is that that vulnerability will not exist in the environment for as long of a time as those that are less frequent. So for instance, if a vulnerability came out in January and you already did your annual vulnerability scan and you don't see it till the next January, you have almost 12 months that the vulnerability is sitting in there. Now, if you're doing regular patching, will it fix it? Yes, of course. But sometimes the patches don't work as intended and that vulnerability may persist. But we won't dive into that here. That's just something to know. The big idea is that it is cheap, it should be done frequently, and it's automated. Those are the three aspects of a vulnerability scan. Now, a penetration test is done by a skilled person. Usually they have some sort of qualification, whether that's lots of experience or certifications that have helped teach them the skills of a hacker. And what I mean by that is most hackers that are out there, they launch their attacks in a very methodical way. And we call this the attack chain. And you have to have a lot of tricks in your pocket in order to completely compromise an organization. And so what you're doing with a pen test is you're simulating the same attacks that an adversary would do for a company. And the idea is that you're finding the flaws before a real bad guy can get in there and do the same and cause damage to reputation, could cause impact to operations, could impact the ability for that company to generate revenue. So, really, what we're looking at is a more in depth look at the health and cybersecurity practices of an organization. And there's different varieties of penetration tests as well. So, we have network ones that focus on the network as a whole, we have web application ones that, you guess it, they focus on websites and web applications themselves. Then there's physical penetration tests where this is like your typical robber type approach. Can we break in? Can we do something to the physical premise itself? And there's other smaller, more technical varieties as well. But the key here, the big difference between this and a vulnerability scan is that you're having to chain all these attacks together in order to successfully accomplish a mission. So during the planning of a penetration test, the consultant works with the client to identify the goal of the assessment. And that can be anything. It just really depends on the organization and what industry they're in. And a bank may say, hey, can you get to our client data? A football team may be, hey, can you get to our playbooks? A hospital, can you get to these systems that are in our operating rooms? Or can you get to the client data? Whatever it is, each organization is different, and that's part of that discussion. And the penetration test, the goal is to start from a specific area. So it could be the internet, it could be from a rogue device, and to make your way to that goal, that mission, that target, whatever you set in the beginning. So that's the penetration test. So again, the difference, the vulnerability scan is you have a set of devices you want to scan and look for vulnerabilities. And then a penetration test, you have a mission you're trying to accomplish. Now, one of the big differences between penetration tests and what's coming up next, which are red teaming engagements, are that penetration tests are very time boxed, time constrained assessments. Typically, you're looking at about a week or so, and they're really fast paced, and they're not meant to say skirt around your MDR, your managed detection and response, your SOC analyst. We're not really worried about that in a penetration test. Our goal is just to find as many attack chains to get to that goal from where we started as possible in the time that we set aside. Again, pretty minimal, about a week usually, just depending on the size and complexity of the network. Some organizations will break it up into small sections of the organization, each a week or 2 weeks or a month, whatever it is. Now, that's pretty much all you need to know about what a penetration test is. And the point of these, again, is to ensure that the organization finds these major flaws, these major attack paths or attack chains before the real bad guys do and do damage. Now, these are typically done on an annual cadence for most organizations who are kind of at a maturity level to start doing them. They may do annual for quite some time, but larger organizations will do them pretty regularly, semi-annually, quarterly, or do rolling pen tests. So if it's a massive organization, they may split up their network into segments and just keep walking through all the segments throughout the year and then start back over. So it just depends on the organization. But for most third parties, you're looking at doing annual or semi-annual for your clients like we do. Now, red team engagements, these are by far the closest and most realistic thing to an adversary. Now, we're still doing real attack techniques in a penetration test. They are absolutely real. They are the same things that they're doing, but you're not trying to subvert detection. We really don't care about that. Red teaming, you get caught, you're done. And you usually start on the outside and you have more things in scope of your capability. You still have a mission, like a penetration test, but you may have social engineering involved. You may have physical penetration testing involved. You're very much likely to have network penetration testing involved, but the techniques have to be very sneaky in order to get around being detected by security software, being detected by your security personnel, and then being able to achieve all of the objectives set without coming across a tripwire and setting off alarms. So red teaming. So these are your more sophisticated offensive personnel doing these, much more mature, bigger bag of tricks. They're much more stealthy. And these engagements usually last a really, really long time. So we're talking about 1 to 3 months, maybe even more, because they're having to really take their time inside the organization. They're moving so slow they're even spending tons of time understanding the organization and trying to figure out where their holes are so they can get in without being seen. So they're having to really invest a lot of time to truly understand the organization before they even make a move, and then understand enough so that when they make a move, they're not seen or detected and they can get out without ever being seen. So that's it. So those are your three pieces. You have vuln scans that are really on the bottom of your hierarchy of difficulty and complexity. You have your penetration test right in the middle there, and then for your advanced stuff. And these are only for your most mature organizations, your red teaming engagements. So for more information, follow us at tandemcybersolutions.com. Follow us here on any social media where you see this, and look out for next videos as we teach you about the different pieces of offensive security services. Till next time.